What if your noble beliefs become someone else's amusement? The tragedy of a failed warrior and his lieutenant. The mad trial of the spirit and the strange punishments and rewards. The story of the sixth night begins now. Naksar lit the sixth candle with a cool touch. Sizzle, the smoke from the candle spread throughout the temple, carried by Naksar's breath. Naksar asked in a low growl from the darkness, "Speak of the results of that playful spirit's trial." Shara calmly continued her story. Under the massive shadow of Naksar, the spirit, awakened by the commotion on the beach, slowly revealed itself from the mist. The spirit spoke to the two with a solemn and respectful voice, as if it were a judge safeguarding an ancient code of law, maintaining an unwavering posture. What good would it do to just blame each other on this narrow island? I will hold a fair trial. The spirit suggested to Tarek and Pidile, creating a bizarre scale by squeezing the sand of the void with its hands to achieve a precise balance. With this scale, I will weigh the testimonies of 3 witnesses and grant the winner the prize of freedom to leave this island. However, the loser will receive a punishment that is fitting. Will you accept judgment according to this trial? Enchanted by the sweet word of freedom, Tariq and Fidile agreed to the trial, each confident in their own righteousness. At that moment, the spirit suddenly began to giggle and dance in a bizarre manner. The solemnity from just a moment ago was nowhere to be found, as a mad frenzy enveloped the beach. As the spirit snapped its fingers, the first ghost, the slave Sabir, appeared from the depths of the sea. Sabir pointed at Tarek. That person saw me as nothing more than a burden. But Pidile tried to block my name when I was about to be thrown into the sea, and even shed tears for me. Sabir's resentment made Tarek's burden of guilt even heavier. It is loyalty to the Sultan. It was merely a warrior's choice to fulfill a command. Tarek protested strongly. Then the spirit seemed to be happy and made a strange, laughing sound as it circled around the beach. I wonder who it will be next. The sea has a lot of memories. The spirit chuckled and summoned the second ghost, Deckhand Omar. Omar spat venom at Pidile. First mate, your weakness has killed us all. If you hadn't delayed in following Lord Tarek's orders, we could have survived. Your compassion was incompetence, and that incompetence was heavier than murder. As Omar's testimony concluded, the weight of Pidile's sins grew heavier, and the scales regained their balance. The weight of sin for Tarek, and Pidile has returned to square one. The spirit seemed to find this situation incredibly amusing, opening its mouth wide and laughing. Finally, when the spirit snapped its fingers, the soul of the spirit Layla, who had perished in the sea along with the flowers, appeared. Layla stared intently at Pidile and said, I was nestled among the flowers that you worshipped. Upon hearing those words, Pidile's complexion turned as pale as paper. Layla added coldly, Lieutenant, you called the flowers. I cherished mere baggage and said to throw them into the sea. There was no place for me in your compassion. Seeing the trembling Pidile, Layla continued her testimony. However, my death is also my fault for having succumbed to the intoxicating fragrance of such a magnificent flower. Neither of you is without serious guilt, but isn't life precious in itself for any reason? As Layla leaned towards Tarek's guilt, the scales tipped in favor of Tarek's wrongdoing. At that moment, the spirit revealed its true colors. It's a very fair result. The winner is the vice captain. You. The spirit blew a puff of breath towards Pitial, sending him flying out of the ship. The winner granted the freedom to leave this island as promised. Ha 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 ha! The spirit laughed joyfully until it was breathless, watching Pitial flying far into the sky. Then it suddenly turned its head and glared at Tarek, who was left alone. Well, is it time to punish now? The spirit opened its mouth as wide as a cave. Tariq tried to draw his sword, but he couldn't move a single finger. The spirit said, "Heavy sins are just delicious seasonings," and began to cruelly tear apart Tarek's head. Every time Tarek's body, filled with conviction, crumbled, a grotesque crunch echoed across the beach. The spirit, having filled its belly, patted its stomach and spoke with satisfaction. It's finally a bit quiet. Should I go back to my interrupted nap? As the story was coming to an end, Naksar, who had been silent, asked the question in a cold voice, as if puzzled. You said you would grant freedom, but instead you gave death. This is a sham trial, where even the promised contract is not upheld. If the spirit sent the winner Pitial out of the realm, then didn't that subordinate also die? How can one survive on the sea without land? If that's the case, aren't both the winner and the loser dead? Shara answered calmly, Naksar, the spirit kept its promise. Pitial is alive because he flew to the sea of the heavens. At that moment, the candle flared up and burned out completely. The massive presence of Naksar paused briefly behind Shara. My lady, on the next night, I will listen to the story of the sea in the sky. The giant shadow of Naksar retreated into the deep darkness of the temple. As the morning sun fully rose, only a serene silence lingered in the temple once again. The unknown space of the spirit's judgment. Pitial, sent away to the sea of heaven. What could the true nature of that sea flowing above the clouds be? On the seventh night, that mysterious prologue unfolds. What do you imagine is waiting for you in that sea? Flowing above the clouds. Please leave your creative guesses in the comments.